Hello guys, thank you so much for coming back to watch another video on my channel. Konami has finally got tired of making those games into pachinko machines, and they finally decided to make these dead IPs into the actual games like Silent Hill and Metal Gear Solid games. So it's a dead giveaway that sooner or later we will hear something from Konami about an upcoming Castlevania game. But which Castlevania game would it be? Let's find out in this video. Now just to confirm, I don't work for Konami, and Konami hasn't made any official statement for an upcoming Castlevania game. Now this is just a speculation video based on the leaks I've been reading for the past few years, so it actually might turn out to be true or maybe false. Here's a compiled list of the Castlevania games which I think has a chance of getting a remake treatment. I'm going to kick off the list of the games with the very first game which has started this Castlevania franchise, Castlevania 1. Now this is the game which has started this story about Belmont's fighting against Count Dracula. Now in this game you actually play Simon Belmont, who is arguably one of the main protagonists of this entire Castlevania games. Now this game came out on NES back in 1986 I believe, and that game was an action platformer. It had around about 18 stages where you fight monsters or the creatures at the end of each stage. But the game has a very limited gameplay mechanics, obviously due to the time when it came out. However, this game has one of the most beautiful settings, the Gothic settings in 1600, where you go and fight this Count Dracula, and it also features classic movie monsters like Frankenstein, Count Dracula and Grim Reaper. You have your main primary weapon which introduces you to the vampire killer whip, which you use throughout the game. Now that game garnered so much interest back in the days and it was very popular, so I think it will be a perfect starting point for Konami to start the Castlevania series. So I personally think it has a chance of getting a remake treatment from Konami, because if they want to start Castlevania franchise, they're not going to start off with a sequel, because there hasn't been a good Castlevania game for the past couple of years. Now the second game on that list is actually Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. Now this is a third installment of the original trilogy of the Castlevania games, however it's a prequel to the first Castlevania game. Now this time around you don't play as Simon Belmont, you actually play his ancestor as a Trevor Belmont. Now in this game you also get accompanied by a thief, a magician and Dracula's own son Alucard. Now the gameplay is very similar to the very first Castlevania game. It's actually a platformer, but it's not very linear, it's non-linear, and you can get different endings if you do different things throughout the game. Now the game had 16 stages, the game was also in the same way, came out on NES back in the days, and the game since when it came out has garnered so much interest that Netflix has actually made an animated series around this Castlevania game, and to be honest, that animated series is one of my favorite animated series of all time. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it on Netflix. The game has a very medieval style, it has a very gothic themed, just like the very first game was. So just imagine this game coming out on the modern day consoles in a very similar style of Bloodborne. So I think this game would actually work if they try to remake this game for the modern consoles. Now the very next game is actually one of my favorite games of all time. It's actually Castlevania Rondo of Blood. This game actually introduces us to Richter Belmont, who is my most favorite protagonist of Castlevania series. Now the primary objective of this game is that you're trying to find your beloved one who's been kidnapped, and you ultimately confront the Count Dracula by the end of the game. The game was action platformer, but the game has a very different style to it. It was actually a modern game compared to the previous Castlevania games, especially the handcrafted cutscenes, and the music was great as well, and the overall story of this game was excellent as well. And this game was universally acclaimed, and since that time it has been re-released on a couple of different platforms, and also Netflix is making another animated series based on this game, Rondo of Blood, where you would actually see the main protagonist as Richter Belmont. There's also another playable character called Maria, which you could also unlock it by the end of the game, and I think you can play it again. I think I've played this game ages ago, but I remember this game was one of the best platformers out there. This game was one of the classics and it had one of the best stories, so I think if Konami wants to garner the interest of the public out there, I think this would be the perfect game to start. for Castlevania, and I think it would make sense to connect the audience with the animated series which is coming out soon. So I personally think it has a chance of getting remake treatment, and it's also one of my favourite games of all time. Now the next game is actually a sequel to Castlevania Rondo of Blood. It's called Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now this game, by many critics, is the best Castlevania game out there, and to be honest, it's also my favourite Castlevania game and one of my favourite metroidvania games out there. It is actually a true metroidvania game. It has one of the best level systems, and you find different weapons throughout the game. This time around you don't play as a Belmont, you're actually trying to save the Belmont by playing as Alucard. He's the son of Count Dracula, so you get the same sort of powers, you collect the powers throughout the game, and this game actually has a very complex structure to it. The castle actually feels like a character on its own. It has different teleportations, different secrets you can find, different weapons you can find, and different abilities you can adopt throughout the game. So I think it probably would be a critical success for Konami to remake this game, and I think there is a chance of this game getting remake treatment, or it might come as a PlayStation exclusive from Konami. The next Castlevania game is Ariel Sorrow. Now this time around you don't play as a Belmont, it's actually set in a distant future, but it is also another metroidvania game which follows the same style of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now this game didn't came out on PlayStation, it actually came out on Game Boy Advance, but that game was critically acclaimed for its level design and how good the game was. And for some critics, this game is the best Castlevania game since Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This time around you don't play as a Belmont, you play as a teenager Soma Cruz who's on a journey to find about his powers, and there's so many twists and turns in the story. The game has the same sort of complex structure which you see in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, but it is actually set in the far distant future, so it doesn't impact the previous Castlevania games. When this game came out, this game was successful, and it also had a sequel after this game, so I think there is a chance of this game getting a remake treatment because it's set in the far future, and it will be like a brand new Castlevania game without touching the original Castlevania games. So I personally think there is a chance of this game getting a remake treatment from Konami. And lastly, I believe there will be a Castlevania brand new game set in an offshoot world with a brand new Belmont, because I think they did try to do that with the Lord of Shadows, and then they would have the freedom to do whatever they want to do with the game and introduce us to brand new enemies or maybe old enemies from the previous Castlevania games. So what do you guys think? That's my list, and I think these games has the potential of getting a remake treatment. If you do agree or disagree, or do you think if there's any game which I missed out, please do let me know in the comment section down below on this video. But that's it for the video. I'll catch you again with another video. Please do also let me know what sort of topics you like, and I would also try to make videos around them. So until then, look after yourself. Have a good one.